Clocks ticking all over the world. Mechanical clockworks. LEDs, liquid quartz, overgrown sundials. Huge, big, small, tiny ticking heartbeat bombs count down to everything. You see, it's all about rhythm. The beat goes on, etc. side. Dream is the skeleton key. Chaos, chance, my beautiful ones, my best girls. Marry me. Wed me to possibility. I, Jacob Marley, do take the soul of the night. The beauty of contradiction and paradox is my bride. She in turn would give me a wild, wild ride.
What would you be doing when you turn 50?
I've discussed this a lot with my brother, and we've discussed how, when I'm 60 years old, actually, how I want to be living down the house at the end of the street, and at 3 a.m. there'll be feedback and stuff coming out of the house, and all the little kids will cross the road to come out of the, you know, when they walk past my house, and I can be as rude and obstreperous and as I like to people, because I'll be old. That's what I want to be doing, being rude and obstreperous.
Rowland kind of emerged onto the scene with everything intact. And I know a lot of people will say this about him, but he was just Rowland. He dressed in a certain way. He had all his kind of influences in place. He knew exactly the way he wanted to play. He knew exactly the way he felt things should be and should sound. He knew absolutely what he hated and despised, and there's no way ever you could play him anything to change that. He was locked into a kind of concrete point of view about things, and this is hugely inspiring.
The time I met Nick, he was just starting to take songwriting seriously.
We just started to hang around more and more together and become friends.
Are you embarrassed about brushing your teeth? No, I never brush them. I'm homosexual. Spit it out, Nick. Is punk homosexual? Oh. Come on, it's your images that are at stake here. My image, okay. Okay. I agree.
I remember we'd be driving to parties in the car crammed full of people, and he'd say, if we had an accident, the whole future of rock and roll's wiped out.
And I used to see him when we were out, sort of always on the move, always not, walking through the crowd with leopard skin shirt and photos of himself as a model of youth.
He was a bit intimidating because he was a 16-year-old person with his presence. He was telling us that our band wasn't very good, but he liked our talent.
I didn't really feel like buying it on face value. I think I pretty much told him that at some party once too, you know, well, it's about time you did something rather than just talking the talk, you know, so... I hadn't seen much evidence of him doing anything after a few months. I hadn't heard him play a note still, so I was a little dubious about whether there was anything behind it or whether he was just a well-read dandy.
1, 2, 3, 4.
At a party, I think.
Rowland and I really hit it off because we were interested in similar things. We loved bands more like Television and things like that.
The day after I met him, we formed the band and wrote a couple of songs.
And they both were such great songwriters and performers, and I can still remember their songs.
What kind of music does your band play?
It varies a lot. There's a lot which most new wave bands would think was sort of too sort of unenergetic and sort of ideas type. We're much more based on ideas than most other bands.
What kinds of ideas? Are they largely destructive ideas?
No, not at all.
Pretentious. Incredibly.
They were pretentious little kids, but, you know, it's all right.
They were absolutely consumed by themselves.
Inspired and confident, just sort of taking his rightful place as a kind of heir to a throne of kind of fame and, you know, creative glory.
Everyone was waiting for it to all come together, and it was just the inevitability that it was going to be genius.
What are some of the titles?
Model of Youth,
Seems So Distant.
My Empire, Broken Hands.
What's Broken Hands about?
Self-mutilation.
Suddenly the Young Charlatans were along with these amazing songs, and the Boys Next Door songs started changing pretty dramatically at the same time.
Two guitarists, both of them incredibly strong, great players. Two songwriters who wrote similar but quite different material. It was like this tension, and that tension created this energy that wasn't necessarily in your face, but it just had its underlying edge. It was just magic. Ollie would write songs like Accident and Drowned. Rowland's were like She's Not the Chosen One, and Broken Hands, about punching the wall because some girl wouldn't go out with him, and Shivers, you know, which is absolutely romantic.
What do you think?
Songs that have something, they mainly have something to do with us. Lots of times they're sort of played characters and stuff.
It was always a mystery that Young Charlatans survived as long as they did.
We did 13 gigs, I think, and then Ollie left the band for what was like the 4th time, and it seemed like little point in continuing this sort of cycle of Ollie leaving the band.
I've been contemplating suicide, but it really doesn't suit my style. So I think I'll just act bored instead and contain the blood I would have shed.
When I was 16, when I was still at Swinburne Community School, I wrote this song, Shivers, which was intended as an ironic comment on the way that I felt that people I knew were making a hysterical thing out of what were essentially high school crushes.
It started off being a very cynical song about their behaviour and their the way that they talked and acted about being in love, which I found to be incredibly insincere and really blown out of all proportion, although I'm hardly one who can speak, as I have a little glass heart pinned to my sleeve most of the time.
He wrote Shivers when he was 16, you know, and this is really extraordinary, that song. The chorus gets me, I can hardly even speak, I can hardly even say that chorus, because it's just so, it's so great and so moving.
Recorded by the Boys Next Door, Nick sort of interpreted it completely differently, and now the song is, to most people's minds, is something completely different from what I intended it to be. But that's always the danger of writing anything, is it's open to interpretation.
You know, I used to dread Shivers coming up in the set because it required a certain amount of proficiency, you know, it required a certain amount of talent to sing because it had a kind of melody and stuff. My heart is really on its knees,
but I keep a poker face so well that even mother that my baby's so vain that she is almost a mirror, and
like most songs that I think, well, people write, and particularly songs I write, they take upon a life of their own, and that song just happened to convey a sense of sincerity about in the most obvious way.
I've been contemplating suicide, but it really doesn't suit my style.
It was tongue in cheek. I mean, it wasn't a straightforward "help me, I'm so sensitive" thing. There were layers to it, I think.
When you're very young and you start out, you have incredibly strong beliefs, and you tend to do things that are very forceful and very focused, I guess, because you know what is black and what is white, and there's absolutely no grey area whatsoever.
That it was something that was so total and that's so loved by everybody and that kind of talked to everybody and all of that sort of stuff that a great song should be able to do. But on the other hand, you write that and you can hang your fucking guitar up and go and do something else. It's just so accomplished.
I suggested that in interest of making the record, that Rowland's voice sounded really good doing Rowland's songs. But I was voted out by Nick, who said, I'm the singer and I'll sing the songs. But my baby's so vain that she is almost a mirror, and the sound of her name sends a permanent shade.
And you know, I was never able to do that song justice, especially back then. Rowland must have been kind of squirming every time I sang it, you know.
It was never turned out the way that I wanted it to be, and so it was a sort of frustrating experience.
You know, I really wish he had have sung that, actually. I wish he had have sung that when we recorded that, because it was, you know, it was his song. And he should have sung that.
Rose thorn. Rose thorn. God, how she overwhelmed me. The magic of details rose from her like cigarette smoke. I reach out and grab her perfume around me like armor. This black Irish sorceress. I hear her voice, deep in her throat, calling my name. Darling, sweetheart. Despite the lazy cat grace walk, she's at my side now. I could not raise my eyes, could not look at her. Rose thorn, light me a cigarette.
I know a girl called Johnny. She's a bullet, she's a villainess. In my silver dress, I'm the disastrous. Combing out her long straight hair. Johnny bangs the drum. Johnny bangs the drum. Johnny bangs the drum. She's my narcotic love. She's my narcotic love. She's my narcotic love. I put my fingers in his
I think Roland was in love with very much every woman he ever met.
God, yeah. He was really, he was always insanely in love with somebody, you know, who wasn't in love with him.
And that's, you know, why all his songs are about pining.
He was very passionate about things and very deeply romantic.
Tragic, romantic.
He had a mad crush on Gina.
Gina Riley, that's right, Kath and Kim.
It might have been Janine. He was really crazy about Janine. It might have been Lisa. It might have been Anita.
Broken Hands was about Lisa Creswell.
And as soon as he went to art school, he met Lisa and Anita and was instantly in love with Lisa and then in love with Anita.
They were all in love with the other one.
I was at this party that Rowland was at, and a bunch of us was at, and the music was very, very loud, I remember. And Anita Lane walked in.
I mean, she was, you know, stunning.
We started to have this conversation together, and all I remember was that I couldn't understand a word that she was saying because the music was so loud.
Nick and Rolly and Pierre was sort of a bit of a threesome.
By the end of that conversation, we were boyfriend and girlfriend.
All tall and dark and hilarious.
Rowland also was very interested in Anita, romantically.
I would have thought so. I mean, everyone did. You know, certainly was.
The first time I ever saw Rolly, he was playing pinball with Janine, the bass player, on the Esplanade.
Oh, Roland was in love with Janine.
I remember thinking that Janine was really old, because she was like 25 or something.
She was really kind of disdainful of Roland being such a sensitive, slim young fellow.
He was quite a frail person.
I don't think people sometimes realised how he felt.
Didn't have that primitive thing going on.
Changing all the boys into girls. She's a narcotic love. She's narcotic love.
He had a crush on me, but at that stage, I just thought, you know, he was like 17 or something.
Genevieve somehow found her way into the mix, and I started going out with Genevieve.
I went out with Nick for about 2 minutes, and during that time, yeah, Lolly became my best friend. He was always there because, yeah, of Nick.
Then she started going out with Rowland.
He became my confidant, and yeah, he was fantastic.
And then I went back with Anita, I think. Something happened like that.
I'd go to parties and he'd be sort of always hanging on the clothesline or leaning up against a speaker beside me, sort of entertaining me with a sort of dry commentary on the proceedings.
Rowland finally got a fantastic girlfriend, like an amazing girl who he was in love with, fell in love with him.
He was standing on top of a really tall stool on top of a table, and I was hanging onto his legs and looking up, and I suddenly just knew that I was totally smitten.
As a couple, they were a trip.
And then that was another kind of creative team.
And we're inseparable and impenetrable.
And it was just bliss. We were so happy and comfortable together.
They wanted to get married like that, you know, they wanted to, they weren't practical enough.
He was very happy.
Yeah, he was. And I think Genevieve was too. She seemed surprised that she suddenly realised that that was the right thing to do.
It was him all along.
Oh my, I've had a vision and this pain. Brush my hair, cut my teeth, sign my life away. The Christian thing to do would be to pick right down.
There was definitely a courtship on from Nick to Rowland.
The catching dollars press me down, cut me out.
But I think it was doubt because he had this other thing planned for himself, his own star.
Take my time, take my pulse again. A Catholic skin, boneless and a fin.
Rowland's influence within the band was massive.
And all of a sudden there was this other dimension to the band.
The sound was so much more interesting.
I think he gave them a bit of an edge.
It was magic.
I think he moved them right away from being sort of power pop band into being a band that was a lot more experimental.
So it was just something that was truly original and extraordinary about what Rowland brought to the band, that changed the sound and widened the options of what that band could actually achieve.
He was playing Hair Shirt, I think, and suddenly these noises started emitting.
Switched all the vibrato on and just went into this feedback kind of thing, and it just sounded amazing. It was just incredible. It just kind of turned into this wall of explosive, which we hadn't really heard before. It was quite exciting.
Developed, or almost from the beginning, had a guitar sound that was absolutely unique. You know, it was extraordinary, really.
There's a line you cross on stage where you sort of go beyond being aware of what's going on so much. Is just you're not thinking anymore about it.
As soon as he played two notes, you knew it was Rowland Howard. There was just a kind of combination of pedals and guitar and the way he played and that defined this sound.
It was certainly a way of releasing a lot of anger and emotions that I had no other way of releasing.
You wouldn't have thought Rolly would be the one to give them some kind of rawness because, you know, people would have thought of him as the delicate flower and them as the manly types.
It's almost like the Boys Next Door sound sort of morphed around Rowland's guitar and then they sort of became one.
Suddenly all bets were off and they scampered down in a different direction.
One of our records is kind of half recorded somewhere and then Rowland had joined and the other half was recorded and there's this kind of gulf between what we were and what we were with Rowland in the band.
They were signed to Mushroom when I joined the band. After I joined the band, nobody from Mushroom ever came to see us, which was nice.
When we went and worked with Tony on the recordings that became the side B, it was pretty much like the band in the studio with an engineer who was actually the craziest member of the band.
So they just turned up at the studio, Richmond Recorders, where I just happened to be the house engineer. And future is, the rest is history, as they say.
He was just fantastic.
It was to do with using effects in a way that no one else had used them, like plugging things into each other that probably shouldn't be plugged into each other and causing all sorts of feedback and chaos and things like that. I suggested using some corrugated iron to surround his amp and therefore put contact mics on that. Oh, he loved the idea of that song, The Friend Catcher, where he basically did a guitar in one take without really touching the guitar, which is something I'd never seen before. He had it all feeding back, so it was just this constant noise. And every time he hit one of the switches, the noise just changed. It'd go deep, it'd go high, it was symphonic.
He was one of the first guitarists that I didn't know what was going on.
He sounded totally unique. I had no idea where he was coming from.
When I heard these guitar sounds,
he was like a guitar hero when there was no guitar heroes.
Rowland's guitar playing, it was not gently weeping, it was hurting.
It was like some weird science fiction character playing guitar.
When we first heard that, it sounded like it came from outer space.
The more I listened to it, I realized all these sort of different degrees of subtlety.
Who's the guy who plays that guitar? You're like, it has to be him. He looks like that guitar sounds.
You could tell how sensitive he was just by the nature of the sounds he created.
This spectral man suffering from malaria, Rimbaud, pulled from Africa and given a guitar.
For a long time kind of hung around with me at Saints gigs and Radio Birdman gigs and stuff like that. And had this perception of me as being a really inarticulate kind of punk or something like that. And he was kind of impressed by the sort of, the kind of idiot savant aspect of my nature, of which I still carry around, except I've forgotten the savant bit. But anyway, he was kind of, I think, slightly depressed and disillusioned when he came around to my house and found a whole lot of Dostoevsky books on my shelf. He was going, "You read this stuff? I thought you were for real."
The English language is one of the most versatile in the world and has such an enormous history and because it's spoken in so many countries, there are so many words and so many variations and like slang words and ambiguities involved in it that And it just sounds really good when it's sung. There's words, there's lots of good words that you can sing, like ectoplasmic and stuff like that.
We were definitely sort of into the same sorts of things. You know, left field literature, the Dadaists, and you know, he himself was a huge Duchamp guy, much more than I was actually. Alfred Jarry.
Nick and I were, you know, heavily sort of influenced by that type of thing, and obviously the idea of having some kind of school of thought and approach is a very attractive one.
This had a big influence over what he did lyrically, I think, for a long time, and it had an influence over what I did lyrically for a shorter time. I kind of went off onto another tangent completely.
When I was in the birthday party, and to a lesser extent with Crime, I had to learn how to write songs that were capable of being used as a vehicle by other people. So I had to stop writing songs that were like directly from my heart and start writing things that were far more ambiguous and could be interpreted by somebody else as something that they wanted, i.e. Nick Cave, as to something that he wanted to represent.
And he continued to write, I think, these kind of absurdist styles lyrically. Songs increasingly so, actually, as the band went on, with kind of quirky guitar lines and absurdist lyrics.
I found that I'd actually forgotten how to go about writing more than a couple of songs every year that were Rowland Howard songs that expressed me.
I became aware of his lyric writing when begrudgingly the birthday party seemed to do a Rowland song now and then. And it was very different lyrically than what Nick Cave was putting across. They always seemed to be very, very romantic. Like, you know, heart not only bleeding, but kind of stabbed in several places and bleeding horribly.
When I'm writing about certain things, particularly subjects that are of emotional intensity, it's very hard to write down all these words about how appallingly tragic your life is or whatever. It's very hard to take it seriously and not... I mean, obviously, humour is a defence.
Really, heroin amongst the St Kilda crowd was the drug of choice. It was cheap, it was freely available, it was all over St Kilda here. And it was strong.
Friends of ours were doing it, and we happened to be there one night when they said, "Do you want some?" We just did it. And, you know, no notion that it would ever be something in our lives.
It was very, very gradual before people started to realise that they were actually thinking about it all the time, and it started to become a daily occurrence, and then, you know, it took over to a really large degree.
We had this utterly demented idea that people in, you know, on the other side of the world had superior taste than, you know, the people that lived here.
We bought one-way tickets and we went to England.
Nick and I wrote this song called Happy Birthday, and it was originally called The Birthday Party, and then we thought that would be a good name for the band.
We ended up there under really bad circumstances.
It was just incredibly difficult for the first year.
Like 10 people living in a one-bedroom flat.
We all stayed there with, I think, with our various girlfriends.
Taken into this very dark squat, sort of candles burning here and there, and someone would kind of sort of flitter past. That was Anita, and then somebody else saying hi and looking down. It was a very sort of weird little scene, and there was like, you know, there was sort of, you know, the drug thing was sort of all happening.
It was quite a struggle because we had to really start from scratch again.
And none of us had any money, and, you know, I got malnutrition, and it was pretty ugly.
Rowland took London personally, like as if someone had built it to sort of to make him unhappy. But he may well have taken the world in that way.
Jermaine Greer had said this thing that an Australian never feels so lonely as the first year or so that they're living in England, and never feels so Australian.
We went from being big fish in a tiny pond to being frog spawn in an ocean. It was bad.
Somehow we'd gone from whatever we were in Australia on that plane trip once we landed in London, and we'd kind of absorbed the massive disappointment of our situation and like the kind of absolutely sort of retarded bands that were playing there at that time. They were nothing like we thought they were going to be like.
Suddenly there was this surge of very shiny new pop with synthesizers. And suddenly it was Boy George and, you know, Haircut 100 and Spandau fucking Ballet.
It was real kind of, really, you know, shoegazing kind of bullshit that was going on there.
But the enemy got it wrong and went with this. I remember distinctly, you know, reading certain people who should remain nameless, and they embraced it. And it was also, you know, cocktails and foppishness. And I think the birthday party was seen as somehow old-fashioned, and rockist was the term that they used.
There was a review of one of our records, I think, actually, or the first record, that said, obviously, we'd spent time out on the Nullarbor with the natives or the Aboriginals. I mean, they weren't even, this was kind of serious.
We found it rather sick-making and decided that we really had to take out the metaphorical mallet and hit our audience over the head with it to achieve some kind of reaction.
Fingers down the throat of love. Fingers down the throat of love. Fingers down the throat of love.
Epic, grotesque, bizarre, strange, wonderful, funny characters on stage.
The rawness and the singularity of what everyone was doing, like Tracy Pugh's bass sound, it's just so on its own, and Rowland never really integrates into the bass, it just sits on top.
One thing the birthday party had was tension in space.
We went to New York in 1981, and the enemy sent a journalist, Barney Hoskins, along with us.
I myself had always thought that New York would be a fairly sophisticated, blasé sort of place. And we did our first show and got thrown off stage in 10 minutes. And I just thought, oh my God, this is all wrong. I mean, we've been playing in Australian RSLs and, you know, 100 miles out of Sydney, and we don't get thrown off stage. And here we are in New York, and we've had the power turned off after 10 minutes. Then we did our next gig, and this is the literal truth. One person came, and that was a Polish girl that I'd met the night before, who I said I'd put on the guest list. And then the next gig we did was at the Ritz, which is this really big mafia-style club. And they let us play for 15 minutes before they threw us off stage because they said that we were trying to incite a riot. So we'd done 3 gigs in New York, and played for approximately 25 minutes. It was really fantastic. It was just great to have that feeling that you were capable of upsetting people so much. By the time we reached like Chicago or LA, we were playing to really packed clubs.
We played the Ritz and they thought we were going to cause a riot, and they escorted us off the premises, you know, with a team of bouncers because we were so huge and muscular and threatening.
I think they played again, and there was like 2,000 people. And I remember walking up to, and there was like seeing the queue go right round the block, and I just thought, this is going to take off, like beyond even their comprehension.
Things would happen and they would influence us to the extent that we would react against them because we usually found them to be so lacking in any kind of power in the emotion and things that were being portrayed. And that drove us on towards trying to make things that were a lot more intense.
We changed hugely, and our live shows became highly confrontational.
The more we stuck ourselves out on a limb, and the more we tended to be abusive towards particularly the English people and populace, the more popular we became. Once we finally quit their country, saying that it was a sinking ship that we were sick of supporting, we became hugely popular. So it was really sort of bizarre in the fact that insults came back as bouquets.
I mean, they were like exorcisms, personal exorcisms.
They sometimes seem to be on the verge of chaos, but never quite falling into chaos.
They were very, very, very powerful and exciting. And the sound they made was horrendous.
Totally feral and totally out of control.
I'd never seen a group that was so filled with contempt for their audience.
I'm not going to say scary, but, you know,
We had an enormous amount of hubris, and we were firmly convinced that we were, you know, certainly as good as it got.
It was, for them, unheard of that anyone from Australia would be coming and playing music that, and doing shows that put a great swathe of English bands into a really bad light. I mean, we were just better. And they knew it.
When baby
Arizona. We played Some Velvet Morning. We finished the song, and this boy who was standing up the front said, "Hey, you know, Lee Hazelwood lives in this town." And I just went, "Oh my God." And he goes, "Yeah, I run this record store," and he comes in all the time. And it was just frightening for me because he's about as close as I come to having an idol, because I think he's one of the greatest songwriters that's ever existed.
The doorbell rings and it's Lydia Lunch. And she swans upstairs and she's sort of all curves and sets on legs, and actually asked me if I would go out for a while so that she could talk to Rowland. And much to my continual bemusement, I actually went.
I had nothing to lose, so why not leave whatever it was I didn't have behind and go to London to pursue Rowland S. Howard.
Rowland's vibe as a singer and a guitar player, and I thought it was really successful the way he teamed up with Lydia. And
It was just an immediate, we just felt an immediate bond.
What made you record these boots weren't made for walking?
Rowland.
They're almost like folk songs. I mean, that's the way they think of Lee Hazelwood's songs in particular, that they have a quality about them that doesn't pin them in any sphere of time whatsoever.
Especially with Some Velvet Morning, which is such a perverse song anyway. Lee Hazelwood being such a perverse songwriter. I mean, an American classic of the weirdest order.
Flowers growing on a hill, dragonflies and daffodils.
I was the magician's apprentice. Fuck, I was 12 years old. We were moving all the time. Melbourne, London, Berlin. I was his psychotic sidekick, the boy wonder to Murdo's masked man.
We went to Berlin and were kind of received with open arms into this community of people that actually, and on some level, reminded us of Melbourne, that was frenetic and anarchic and really creative, that didn't have the same prejudices and the kind of superior way that the British had about our band.
Berlin in the mid-'80s, it's a very odd story. I was gone for 8 years from Berlin. I lived in America, and I returned in '84 and came back to a different city. It was a very exciting moment in the history of Berlin. It was a very lively music scene, and especially this bunch of Australians who had landed from a different planet in Berlin.
Their appearance almost changed everything in the scene. Clothes and how to behave and talk and walk even and look like, you know, everyone had spiky hair all of a sudden, you know, and pointy shoes.
They looked always like birds to me, especially in the winter. Berlin has this incredible amount of Siberian crows. They come by the thousands, and they live in Berlin during the winter, and sometimes the sky was dark with these black crows. And of course, from all that Caligari look, and I don't think anybody ever wore any other color than black. And they had this vampirish life. As soon as the daylight came up, they were gone. And when the sun went down, they showed up again.
The war was around, you know, it was a tight group of people, and they all took more or less speed. Whereas the Melbourne crowds, they brought over the heroin into the music scene.
There was a hush when they showed up somewhere. I mean, they were really big. They were the biggest thing in Berlin.
The birthday party were the cool boys of Berlin for a while, and all the girls wanted to sleep with them, all the German girls.
Rowland was an important figure for Berliners at the time. He made legendary sounds and had this strange stagger on the stage. I mean, he was our Jeffrey Lee Pierce, and we all thought he was even better. I met him quite often standing at a bar in some of these clubs and after the show, but he was not talkative. Rowland was not talkative.
Lydia Lunch was making a record, and we went into this studio called Thomas Funk Studios in Berlin, and there was Blixer all wrapped up in his rubber suit with his seatbelt, like a beauty queen from another planet. Nick had made sort of best friends with Blixer, and they were hanging around, and all of a sudden Rowland was just sort of on the out.
But I think Rowland already felt that he wasn't being appreciated. I think he felt as a guitar player he was, but as a songwriter, etc.
His songs were getting very often into a place that didn't really suit the band all the time.
Nick is a very competitive sort of fellow. Rowland had sort of probably, you know, was quite precious about the way he wanted his songs.
We started going in a different direction lyrically. My lyrical style changed.
I don't think it was that comfortable for Nick singing his songs because they were about subject matter and so forth that Nick was away from at the time.
But it came to a point where I think Rowland was really hurt, and so he stopped attending meetings, or when wages were being done, would turn up after the others had left or before the others. It was hard.
I think it started being difficult for him to feel fully realised in the band.
It came as a bit of a shock that nobody really vocalised at the time until the last meeting.
He always thought of them as a sort of gang. It wasn't just music, it was like, yeah, everything, friends. And Rolly just couldn't understand what he'd done.
You know, I just cannot sing any more of these songs. It's got to finish.
Basically a phone call, I remember, from Mick Harvey, who decided that it wasn't working, or something wasn't working within the group. Probably quite an astute sort of observation from him.
Rowland's response was, oh, I'm really surprised. And I said, what are you surprised about? And he said, I'm just surprised you did it before me.
I mean, I was happy to go along with anything, but it was like, oh, all right.
Nick was very much like, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea, that's a good idea. I think it'd be good, yeah, it's the right thing to do, it's kind of running out of steam.
We're no longer a band. And it was a shock, it was a real shock.
When there's that huge sort of investment in something and you're just like in it and you're in the present, it's very barbaric, like that's what animals do. They're just in the present and they have no future and they don't really care about the past. It was the retraction of friendship or the retraction of warmth or the lack of connection that really hurt him.
To our minds, we'd been procrastinating and not really achieving anything for ages, but when I look back on it, it was literally about 4 months.
The birthday party broke up within a month, or was it, 2 months. Man or Myth were playing here in Melbourne, which was like the birthday party minus myself, doing songs that I'd written, which I found fairly appalling. And I gotten fairly disillusioned with things for a long time, and I sat around and didn't do anything. And then one day Mick Harvey rang me up and said words to the effect that I was wasting myself, and that he was shipping Simon Bonnie over in a crate from Australia, and where I liked to play guitar.
Mick Harvey and I had been enormous admirers of the two very different incarnations of the group that happened before.
And then I started seeing two bands. There was Nick and the Bad Seeds with Blixer Bogart as their guitar hero, and there were Crime and City Solutions with Rowland as their guitar hero. And you would have thought it would have been a shame that Birthday Party was gone, but actually it was twice as good. When I decided to make a film in the city of Berlin, sort of a tribute to Berlin, Portrait of Berlin really was the first idea for Wings of Desire. And for a while I didn't have any characters, was just looking for characters to allow me to show the city in the widest sense until I found my guardian angels. But one thing was clear from the beginning, both The Bad Seeds and Crime and City Solution had to be in that movie because musically that's where Berlin was. And from behind the band, all of a sudden, Rowland was the key character because he was staggering in front of the camera. And I watched him more than anything else. We sort of choreographed the scene with Rowland and his stagger. In hindsight, Simon was a little disappointed. We were not enough on him.
I mean, it was really nice having the band captured on film by the man who filmed Beauty and the Beast. It was great. And I think it works far better than the Bad Seeds sequence.
He did shoot The Beauty and the Beast, which in my book is still the most glorious black and white film. He made countless movies. But I think Beauty and the Beast is the black and white masterpiece. And of course, Henri really gave us the look for Wings of Desire and influenced the film.
I found myself in a group that wasn't anything like I'd expected it to be and wasn't really what I wanted to be doing musically. And there was no room for anything throwaway. And I really tended to feel like a bit of a bull in a china shop. Like if I didn't restrain myself the whole time, I'd just smash the little glass frame that held the things together. So it was a really physically uncomfortable thing, like that dog out there, for me to do because I didn't. I just felt really really held back and restrained the entire time.
I did lose sight of them, and Simon went to Los Angeles. And for instance, I never saw these Immortal Souls, although I really loved their music. And followed Rowland's solo career and everything he did afterwards, and sort of kept in touch, but I never met him again because he left Berlin and never ever met him again.
I'm just waiting for the rest of my peers to collect their collective wits, gather themselves about them, gather their technology about them. With this incredibly sophisticated technology that we use, i.e. guitar-based drummers, piano.
Then came these Immortal Souls, and it was just, wow, it's Rowland. There he is.
Ready?
Because as soon as we started playing together, everything sounded really good.
He loved idiosyncratic playing, and he thought in these Mortal Souls we were all very idiosyncratic.
I personally don't find my ideas interesting enough to think that I could carry off the whole thing with my ideas, because it would just mean that basically there was no mystery in it for me because I'd know everything beforehand.
We immediately started playing with them when we'd go over there, and we got SST Records interested, and they released their record here.
They were always giving us shows, and I think our first show was supporting Sonic Youth.
I feel like with this group I have the support of the other people in the group behind me. to a certain extent, I have a certain amount of veto power, just as a singer in any group does, because if the singer in a group is not convinced by an idea, then obviously they're not going to do it sincerely and it won't come across well, which was a situation I'd run into in the past quite a few times. It's just that now I'm in a position to do it myself.
We did other tours of Europe, and we went to America for 5 weeks, and it was fantastic, and we got better and better every night that we played.
These Immortal Souls were a terrific band. A good gig would be just, you know, absolute joy.
The lyrics still have that real intense, like, you know, one of his songs weighs 10 more pounds than anybody else's, you know, full of the weight of blood.
Like showing somebody a song that you've written is, I still find it really painful.
I was strictly insomniacal.
They were amazing. I mean, you know, what can you say? Now that, more than Crime, they should have been a big band.
I'm trying to sort of devote all my energies towards these Immortal Souls so that people can understand and comprehend that this is like my group that I have, and which is a long-term thing and not just a flash in the pan.
He was nearly a good leader, but he wasn't quite. He wasn't very forthcoming with encouragement.
He could be a hard taskmaster at rehearsal. It was like he had such a defined feel or vision of what he wanted.
He was really good at first, and then he became increasingly sort of, you know, you could not get a good word out of him. And, you know, occasionally I would hear something from Genevieve. Oh, but Harry, he thinks you're a wonderful bass player. And, you know, think, well, really? Well, that's not the impression that I get. How did I wind up in the same field as Rowland, you know? What a stupid thing to do. I don't mind being in Rowland's shadow. I couldn't care less, actually. It's a good shadow. I love Rowland's shadow.
Hush now. Don't explain.
He played in Glasgow and he was him and Nicky Sudden, just two guys. I think Rowland had a gold shirt and maybe Sudden had a gold jacket. There was a lot of gold on stage. Just Rowland and a Jaguar and a twin reverb, a classic. It was free-form guitar playing and it was incredible. I think I went backstage or maybe seen him in the hall, but I remember just saying, I want to fuck you.
Don't explain.
Or something like that. It was something really, really ridiculous. You know, I fucking love you, I want to fuck you. It's so beautiful.
Nicky and Rowland were very close. They toured and they made records together and also they were really close. You could see they really actually loved each other.
I really like what he did then, and that's a prime example of Rowland being, like, super relaxed in the studio.
He'd done this song with Nicky, Don't Explain, a cover of the Billie Holiday, which was my favorite thing he did, actually, and with Nicky, who I also love, as a friend, too. And I remember Nicky saying, go on, sing. And Rowland was really reluctant to do lead vocals, and Nicky was saying, sing. And I think it was Nicky's encouragement. But I think Rowland was a bit insecure initially, but I'm glad he did sing. No one else sounds like that.
Don't explain.
Nicky was obsessed with 19th century Britain and 18th century Britain, like colonial Britain. And wrote about it all the time and liked to dress like a dandy and read all these old books and stuff. He had a huge collection of antiquarian books at the time. And of course, Rowland was like that with his cravats and everything, and it's kind of like, you know, the cigarette held just so and everything. It was fantastic.
That I love you, what loving does.
I think that women write about sexuality in a far more poignant and sensitive and incisive way than any man ever has.
Rowland always had good relationships with women and saw them as people, in spite of his mad crushes.
They've all been intelligent women. They've all been very opinionated women. They've all been very strong. They've all been very demanding women.
I guess he wasn't afraid of my aggressiveness, the way that some more macho guys are very confronted by me.
I think that a lot of the best singers of all time have been women.
When I moved to New Orleans in 1990, it just seemed to me urgent that I bring Rowland there, because it just seemed the atmosphere would definitely be conducive for the kind of music that, well, we both needed to make together.
I remember going to New Orleans and I felt more at home there than I had anywhere else, because it had sort of heat and sort of, I just felt like it was more like my natural environment somehow.
He'd read loads of books that were set around there. He loved that it had French influences and slave influences and Indian, just so many things bubbling up.
Nature is sort of evident there, whereas Europe, nature's not particularly evident, or not in the same way that it is in Australia. It's different. Now, it was sort of interesting because I'd never really considered myself to be Australian before.
The concept is kind of swamp, voodoo, romantic, lush commingling of these energies. It's great also because the live shows were Harry Howard and Rowland Howard, so that was just a musical sandwich that was delectable from the word go.
Harry was on the tour as well. He was playing bass. So they were it was interesting to see the two of them playing off of each other.
And Lydia, you know, she's got many sides to her personality, some very sweet and some not so sweet.
Harry was very shy and very smart and reserved and very unrock. I mean, and very straight, and not doing drugs, maybe drinking a little. And I just threw a knife and it stuck in the wall next to his head. But I just said, I don't even know what I said. Don't piss me off, Harry. Of course he hadn't. It was just like, Rowland just smiled.
Rowland had a pronounced aversion to bananas. At first I thought he was kidding. But whenever bananas would appear in the dressing room, he would denounce them as an evil fruit.
She was a good band leader. You did get a sense that you were working as a team for someone who had high expectations and wanted you to do well.
I would provoke him with bananas. I remember one time invading his bedroom, his hotel bedroom, wearing a crown of a bunch of bananas and dancing provocatively on his bed. And he was horrified, truly horrified.
At first, it was like immortality, the sleeping mask. Illuminescence, the instinct up and down my spine like a big electric cat. A medicinal vapor trail that curls in my nostrils. My vision tunnels. I crash and burn. One long moment.
Rolly and I weren't in a very good state, health-wise, I don't think, at the time, which must have impacted on things. We're working with Tony, who was in a similar way.
We were spending a lot of time looking for drugs and not a lot of time recording. In fact, I can remember an instance of going into the studio and all sitting around looking at each other, feeling pretty grim, and going off to score. And it was about the end of it.
His drug use kind of increased around that time and he became a bit more chaotic and I became less close with him over that period of time.
of our relationship in London. I had actually said to him a few times that I couldn't cope with the lifestyle and the things that I had to do, rotten jobs I had to have in order to get money, and suggested that maybe we should part company, and he hated that. No, he didn't want to be left. You just can't give up while you're together. It's just impossible. It's exponentially more difficult than giving up alone. And one night he'd got something, and I had been feeling really good for about 3 weeks, and I was out with Harry and Chris Hughes and a couple of girls, and I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to use. I stayed up all night. I went to Highgate Cemetery in the morning. I didn't get home till 11. He said, "Jen, I wrote a song," and it was a song called Shut Me Down.
Well, so long, soldier. We're deep in Dutch. I can't ignore it. I miss you so much. I miss you so much. I miss you so.
I just sort of realised that for a long time I'd been in England because people had been telling me that I needed to be there. But I was just having a miserable life, and I just thought, well, you know, this is stupid because I'm not playing music because I'm miserable. I'm here because I'm supposed to be playing music. So I just moved back to Australia, and I've just spent too many years away from my family.
That was one of the major reasons that Rowland came back to Australia, was to be nearer his mother. She was lovely, Lorraine. She was a strange mixture of things. She was really independent in a way. I think you'd have to be married to Jock. And she used to go on adventures on her own, which I really admired, and Rolly did too.
She was very demonstrative and loving and would say all the, you know, "I love you so much, you're so beautiful. You can do anything you want," she'd say. "You can do anything at all that you want."
His father is just incredibly absent emotionally, and when you talk to him, he's always right.
Dad's intrinsic problem of if anyone got close to him, then they became more threatening to him.
I think he adored us when we were little, and once we got to about 3 and started becoming real full people, he just couldn't cope with us at all, didn't know what to do with us, and shut down on us.
He was so sure that nothing his son could do would ever make any impression on anybody else.
It's, you know, kind of biologically impossible to stop seeking your parents' approval if you're 4 or 40, you know. So he had that ongoing struggle of trying to get his dad to acknowledge what he'd done and being constantly disappointed that he wasn't.
Rowland continued to be quite, you know, severely hurt sometimes. It was very sad to see. Rowland sort of retreated more into kind of his creative world.
He just got closer to Mum instead.
I was probably 3, and he was, I suppose, my mum's boyfriend at the time. And so I don't really remember meeting him. I just kind of... He's basically been in my life since I can remember.
Are we there?
It was very romantic because it was very chaste, you know, so there was this very kind of old-fashioned, I guess, courtship, you know. And I used to kind of drive him to his shows and stuff and be a chauffeur for him, and it kind of, yeah, once I was single, it sort of quickly turned into a relationship.
Rolly would play remarkable sets at these various pubs, and there would be 10, 20, 30, 40 or 50 people in the audience.
Just before we got married, in the first kind of year of us living together, he started writing and recording teenage snuff film.
There was a point before Teenage Snuff Film where I thought I'd really like to do something with Rowland because I think my bass playing is complementary to his guitar style. So I actually wrote a couple of bass riffs and on my little TAC 4 track. One of them was dum 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 dum.
This is a warning, it comes to hit me. This is a sign, I don't get out of bed thing.
Just kind of called me up and said, well, I want to do this solo album, I want to do an album, and, you know, would you help me? And I said, yeah, yes.
And people had said to me, look, don't put out Rowland's record or you'll regret it. And I was like, well, you don't understand. You think of Rowland as, I've known Rowland as, as a 15-year-old kid. We've got a better relationship than that.
Little did I expect that it would just be me and him recording all the basic tracks together. I think apart from 2 songs, I think all the basic tracks are just him playing guitar and me playing drums.
And I tried to speak, but I could not.
You know, I just sort of reached a stage where I didn't want to have to argue with people about stuff anymore. I didn't want to have to sort of have 3 other people agree with what I wanted to call the album or, you know, agree with what songs are on the album. I wanted to just be able to say, this is the song, and if somebody played something I didn't like, to be able to say, well, you can't do that.
He was making an album, so I had to have an album as well. And so I wrote some songs, and he would fret the chords, and I would sit on his lap and strum the guitar, and that got recorded.
To remember you by.
That was a really great time for him musically. He was really, really inspired.
One of the whole points of the record was to retain something of the sparseness and the intimacy of the solo shows that I've been doing, and just to have some kind of space in the music. And I think we achieved that really well. I mean, it's a very simple record, and I think it's probably the simplest thing I've ever done.
And we all lived in a share house in Windsor, and that was just on constant rotation. We knew every lyric, you know, we knew it backwards, and we all were just obsessed with that record.
I'd lost my brother. I'd been quite hideously dumped by a boyfriend within a year. And I was listening to Teenage Snuff Film on repeat.
And there's such this beautiful ache to the way he would put a lyric into a song.
The songwriting was just beautiful.
There was a deadpan sarcasm to his voice that really intrigued me that I hadn't heard before. I hadn't heard anyone sing like that. I found it hilarious, actually.
There's so much humor in his music, like there's like wit, while he's kind of ripping your heart out.
It just felt like a perfect piece of work that captured a moment. The moment could have been 24 hours.
Yes, you can put that in your top, I don't know, top 50 easily.
24 hours in the life of Rowland, all of this happened.
It's an album that, you know, seems to have a long-term effect. You know, it's
it's kind of
still
timeless.
Yeah, it's timeless. It's still affecting people now.
I don't need religion. I've got this.
lived with each other and we cared. We loved each other, so I guess he kind of just became a parent in a way.
Up until that point, he adored Rowland, you know, it was sort of all over him. And then as soon as we became a couple, he, you know, rejected him vociferously.
It seemed that he could remember very well what it was like to be a little kid and that it wasn't that far off.
Rowland looked after Tom during the day, so he got him to kinder and, you know, picked him up and spent more time with him in those early years than I did, really.
We kept devising plans to throw my arch nemesis at creche into the bin, Robbie, and we'd go to his house and pretend to be cops and scare him, and because I don't know why I didn't like Robbie, but I didn't.
My fantasy was that Rowland and I could at least just live together and enjoy our relationship and kind of develop that without any other unnecessary stresses.
There was lots of murder. Just in general, it was somewhat a little bit violent, and it would be boyish violent for me, and kind of, I guess there was a little bit of a sinister edge coming from Rowland as well.
It was fantastic. I mean, those kind of early years were probably amongst the happiest in my life, you know, if not the happiest. Probably the happiest in my life, really.
I spent a lot of time, especially before I was at school, just the two of us hanging out, and that's probably, yeah, they're my fondest memories of the early days. It was all really fun.
I light another cigarette, and as I cup my hands around the flame, the whole place explodes. Nothing happens a lot around here. So it's just the old lady and me, the piggy, one of which is the pooch situation, as I've come to think of. Lisa said about the dog's skull with her walking stick. Zoltar, the hellhound, has up and clamped his spring-loaded jaws on the fingers. Exploded, snapping and popping like breakfast.
He had actually spent a couple of years writing a novel, which was kind of keeping him occupied, and he was writing that when I met him.
The first one is about someone who sort of traverses the realms of reality through sleep and dream, and it actually helped by a drug, and his father is someone who sells or makes the drug.
England swings. Go to London, England. Turn left into Willesden Lane and keep on up to the first bend. It's right there. Hide inside the tendrils of the oldest and least appealing part of this place. I found Strange Bodycoat. Mr. Strange Bodycoat. That's when it all started to happen. When I first started to remember. I'll find you through the neon signs, the weather, the whirlwind, tippy-toe parade of curtains. Onto her shoulders with the gunshot rolling deep across the bay.
I think he was only completely drug-free for a couple of months before he buckled.
I didn't find out until after they'd split. And then kind of memories came through and it kind of all clicked.
I kind of tried a million things, you know, and suggested that, you know, well, maybe you could just use every second week or whatever. And, but then, you know, I kind of succumbed and got into trouble myself, and that was the thing that became, that ultimately meant that our marriage had to end.
What I do remember is kind of is wanting to see Rowland and knowing that he felt quite guilty and wanting to reassure him that I didn't hold anything against him anymore.
Until about 5 years ago, I would have said that I didn't regret what I've done, all my time spent taking drugs, but now I really regret it. No, it's changed my life for forever, and and I've just lost so much of my life and so much time that I could have spent doing things that would have been really meaningful for me, or doing, yeah, it has just been wasted. It just, yeah, just wasted, thrown away.
He used to talk about something called black milk a lot, and he wrote a song about it. And it's not just a drug reference, it's the whole feeling of this thing that's like dark and beautiful and sort of sticky, sweet and hypnotic, and it sustains you and feeds you and makes everything really beautiful and amazing, but at the same time there's a fatal flaw, and it's like poison.
I'm blinding, autoluminescent. I am white heat. I am heaven sent. I was a nightmare, but I'm not gonna go there again.
He seemed so diminished by his sort of heartbreak, and he kept saying he was a three-time loser and that he'd lost everything. I just couldn't see him evicted.
They had no choice, really, in a way. They were just so closely linked.
After about 1.5 years, he managed to stop using. It was an odd time because he was trying to get on interferon as well, and the psychiatrist wouldn't let him go on it because he had problems, and, you know, he was still sad about his marriage breakup, and interferon makes you depressed. But eventually he convinced them, and when he was on it, by the time he was on interferon, he'd completely stopped.
Soaring through outer space, there is no better place to be.
At first, you know, I'd been promising him that he'd feel fantastic, you know, and he didn't. And he'd say to me, "You said I was going to feel much better." You know, I feel like crap. But he got through it.
I'm greater than God in light. I am dangerous. I cut like a shark.
He got every side effect under the sun. And just kept, they wanted to take him off it because he'd got so thin and his bloods were all over the place. But he insisted. He wanted to get rid of it. And he was so pleased. You know, he got rid of heroin, he'd got rid of Hep C. He was still not feeling great, but gradually, about 6 months after he stopped interferon, we moved in here. He started going out, he was playing all the time. People were responding to him in a really different way. People were sort of catching on to the idea that he'd stopped.
Rowland would ask me, you know, how do you want this album to sound? And I said, well, I want it to sound like the glass of wine's there and the ashtray's there. I want it to sound like that. And he went, right. So he knew what I wanted.
You would never want to rehearse, though, Rowland, and so, like, we had to show up, like, and do everything just, you know, raw, which was kind of infuriating, you know, though it worked out well.
He was producing hate rock, and he had this huge fascination with John, just everything about her.
We only saw him a couple of hours a day, mind you. He was very, very exhausted on interferon. We had him 2 hours a day, 3 to 5. Little cat would stroll into the studio.
Having him in the studio was as much about his aura as it was about what he was saying.
You could actually talk about
a concept in a much more on a higher, more abstract level.
I think we played the song to him once, and then he just went in there and played it, and we were all just sitting in the control room, just like,
Oh, yeah.
check this out.
I think I was just almost laughing hysterically how good it was.
It sounded great, Roland.
I can do better.
He mentioned something about Bianca meeting this like rather, tall, quite crazy young girl, and I could tell in his eyes that there was a certain interest beyond just like the fandom that I guess he would normally get through his MySpace.
I just kind of approached Rowland as fangirl, ultimate fangirl.
Bianca gave Rowland a hug that lasted maybe 2 minutes, and Rowland told me and Conrad he hadn't been hugged like that in maybe 6 years. He finally got the hug that lasted.
Went over and said to him, I never wanted to be this person, but you're just the best person in the whole world. And he said, I don't know about that. And I said, but you're the best fucking guitarist in the whole world. And he said, yeah, thanks.
And that was it. He was smitten, I'm telling you.
They were such a great couple. They were tall and, they were very commanding to see them both together.
And after the initial I'm with Rowland S. Howard thing wore off, I didn't really think about that so much anymore. It was just the person that I loved.
There we go.
Coming along the other side of the bay with his arm around a beautiful girl and his guitar in hand, just swanning along, was Rowland S. Howard, true to form.
He did have a respect for women too. I think he just liked them as creatures. I think he preferred the company of women to men as well.
Bianca was fantastic for Rowland. He had a bit of a spring in his step, a bit of a strut. He was laughing a lot more, and he was also far more exhausted than I'd seen in a long time.
I said to Rowland once, when do you kind of grow up? And he said, you're asking the wrong person. I don't think that he felt like his youth was a lifetime ago.
Look, I had some things to do.
What?
It was a busy 8 years.
I think my particular journey through music has been very slow, and it's taken me a long time to achieve the confidence that I needed to do my best work.
He'd been sick for a long time, and he'd been on interferon, gotten rid of his hepatitis, and then, he fell in love, and then they wanted him to make another record, and he was really sort of happy about where his life was going, and, then he got sick again.
Once we were doing the Pop Crimes album, it was, there was a huge amount of interest suddenly. This groundswell of interest in what Rowland S. Howard might be doing this month.
There was talk about international tours, about European tours. There was talk about American tours. There was a genuine excitement in the record he'd just made.
I've got some new songs tonight, which is a frightening proposition. And one scares me immensely. Okay.
He and Brian and Mick were recording the basic track, and he sort of said, you find a sound. He found me in the kitchen of Birdland with a plastic cup and a mirror. It sounded like a tortured donkey. It was like, it sounds terrible. Quick, record it.
Everything was looking up, and yeah, it was great. And he was just so pleased just to wake up in the morning and feel okay. It was such a luxury.
I find it remarkable that most people don't seem to see the world as being essentially a very sad place, because I think it is.
He wanted to know, because he thought I would understand because I'd been paralysed. What do you tell people when you're thinking you're never going to walk or you're going to die one day? What do you tell them?
He realised that his last album would be, you know, his last album.
I know it was an enormous help to him, me doing it, but it was a fantastic experience for me too. Because I really liked both the recording sessions and got an enormous amount of artistic enjoyment out of working on those records.
I mean, he was really enthusiastic about this record, and he was really keen to, promote it and play gigs, and it was great, and there was a whole new audience that was coming through, and all of that was sort of energising for him. It was just it's a shame we had to stop.
One day he was out and I put it on and it was just so great, and I played it over and over again, and I always heard Rolly come in the door, like, footsteps, keys. He must have heard the music from outside and sneaked in really quietly, and he'd come round behind me in the lounge room, and I was just sitting at the computer playing things over and over again, I think, saying things like, oh, Rolly. And then I think Golden Age of Bloodshed came on. And I think I started crying, and all of a sudden he was just there behind me. I was really shocked at how much he needed me to like it and how pleased he was, and I liked it so much. And it was just really beautiful.
The signs in the sky won't let up. The clouds assume the shape of Catholic girls with Uzis. All of them on the make. All of them out to make $1 million by the time they hit 13. And it's all in the color of the old sun setting, this brand new age of bloodletting, and it's all in the eyes of me. I'm suspicious of my wife. I suspect she left long ago. I recall my finger on the button of the ejector seat, but I can't recall letting her go. The electric Christ has canonized her. She's surrounded by chemical glow. It has to be said, it's today's edition of the Book of the Dead. It has to be said.
There's a
version of You Are My Sunshine by Brian Ferry from like 1973 or something, and he just makes it the most appallingly sorrowful song that you've ever heard in your life, and it's incredibly slow, and it goes for about 7 minutes or something, and it's just so fantastic because it's you know, this song that has become, through virtue of the use of the word sunshine, has become sort of perceived as being something that is upbeat, but it's you know, it's actually about someone who dies and is, you know, consequently very sad. So, and I think The Carnival Is Over is you know, intrinsically achingly sad.
I step through the gates of St. Louis Cathedral. I'm surrounded by an absence of rose. The cathedral rears up before me, huge and calm. Cypress trees bear witness to nothing and sway unruffled, slow dancing on the wind and rain. And I know that every clock, watch and chronograph have just snapped to the grid. That it's now 11:22 a.m. On my second step down the path, the sun comes out, bright, stolen gold. I inhale deeply. There is no sound but the rushing crackle of burning tobacco. I look up at the sky's reflection. Pools of water glisten at my feet. For one small moment, the silence is broken by a sound hard and fast at my heels. And in that moment, I am impossibly light and heavier than I can bear. The sky tilts on its axis, and I'm staring straight into its vault. I close my eyes and look into heaven. The sun explodes behind my eyes. In a heartbeat, the sky goes out. In another, they're all gone. Angels all. I feel a shadow fall over me, but my eyes can no longer open. As I stare up into the vacant blue, there is no weather. And I realize that for the first time now, I am only in dream.
Rowland Howard.
I'm blinding, autoluminescent. I am white heat. I am heaven sent. I was a nightmare, but I'm not gonna go there again. Into the black hole, the house of no contest. Make mine a meteor, rise me above the rest. I'm soaring through outer space. There is no better place to be. Jesus Christ, I'm greater than God in light. I am dangerous, I cut like the sharpest knife. I'm going over, and I hope I can hold her. Into the darkness, I gave away myself, slipped on the spiral stairs, tumbling down the well. I fell on a soft spot. I'm white heat, I'm white hot again.